Hi everybody. Thank you for joining me today as we continue having fun creating art. The name of this video is Creating Art from the Ordinary. So I'm going to focus on, has there ever been a time when you may be wanting to create, you have the urge to create, and maybe you don't have the right paints, maybe you don't have the right supplies, and you're frustrated. Maybe you're stuck at home, the kids are napping, or there's some reason why you can't get out to go purchase things. So I'm going to take you through some exercises of how you can use things in nature, around the house, to create. And some of the examples we're going to do is we're going to do some eco printing with just natural pieces of material, foliage, and leaves and flowers. We're going to create that on papers. We're going to, I'm going to show you how to do some rusting on paper and on fabric. And some of my final pieces of doing this, then what you do with it. I love bookmaking, so sometimes I will turn these into books or cards, whatever. But it's fun to do this sort of thing. The other is where you take fabric. I'm going to show you a recipe on how to actually bleach fabric and come up with your own pattern and design. And then the final process we're going to explore is creating egg tempera and kind of look at the history of egg tempera, how it was used in the past, and how you can create your own just from eggs and water. We'll get some water, distilled water, and palette knife, and so we'll have fun doing this. We've got lots to do, so let's go ahead, let's get started. Eco printing is one of my favorite things to do. It's pretty simple. All it involves is just some natural plant materials, flowers, leaves, foliage that you can get from your yard, or even inside plants. And it involves steaming it in a pot over a period of time and pressing those layers together. So the first thing we're going to look at is the paper you need to use. When you're looking at paper, make sure you're getting something that's heavier. And it needs to be a heavier cardstock or watercolor paper or even a sketchbook paper. But please don't use paper that can't withstand all the moisture and the wetness in the water. So then we're going to look at the some of the other tools that you need to have. Binder clips are great to have, that you can hold some of these layers together, and you can secure the layers either with a corrugated cardboard, tie it with string, use binder clips, or I even found some old tiles that I had around the house and in the basement, and I use those to sandwich the layers of paper or fabric together. Next, you'll need to treat your paper before you try to put the foliage in between the layers. So the way I do it is you need a mordant. You may ask, what is a mordant? That's some kind of substance that's usually acidic, and it allows for the dyes to absorb better into the paper or the fabric. And we're going to use alum, which is something you can buy at the grocery store in the spice section. And you need 1 teaspoon of alum with a cup of hot water, and you dissolve it and make sure that it's really dissolved. Then what I did was find just a baking sheet that my papers would fit in, and I added the hot water and alum, and then I added cold water to pretty much fill the baking container, the casserole dish. And once I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and take my paper, and you can see in this picture, 1 sheet at a time, because paper has sizing on it and it's going to create air bubbles. So 1 sheet at a time I put in there and make sure each sheet is fully soaked. Once I get the sheets in there, I weigh them down with a couple of glasses, and I set them aside for maybe 30 minutes just while I'm getting everything else ready. There's not a specific time, but make sure they're nice and soaked. So next on the to-do list, while the paper's soaking, is to find either a double boiler, a large pot, a roasting pan, something that is large enough to accommodate your paper or fabric sandwiches that you make. So I was showing you that first pot. That's the one I'm going to use. It's like a stew pot. Here's a double boiler. You can see the inside of it. The goal is to have something that you can raise the paper off the bottom of the pan. So you're going to put water in the bottom of the pan and you're going to boil it. So here's something I found that is it just raises, it just lifts everything up. It's like kind of like a strainer that lifts things up off the bottom of the pan. I put it in my pan, in my pot, and I add some water to it, which is I'm going to boil. I don't add tons of it, but an inch or so of water in the bottom. And I turn the heat on, I put the lid on it, and let it start boiling. So here's the fun part. While that water is boiling, go outside. You can go into your own yard or go on a walk, but find some flowers. Find some foliage, some leaves, some grasses, just anything, and that sometimes you can do this in the summer where there's lots of growth around you. But I just chose things. I even had plants from the inside of my house that I just pulled some of the leaves off. When you do this, you're not going to actually get the color of the leaf or the flower. You may get a totally different color. Sometimes I have seen people use sweet potato vines and the leaves from sweet potato plants, and it turns out to be a beautiful purple color instead of a green leaf. So it's all experimentation. Just choose some foliage and have fun. Next step is to take your paper one sheet at a time out of the alum and water bath and start blotting it. I just use paper towels. You don't want your paper to be sopping wet. You do want it to be nice and damp, so blot it. Then I took some old tiles that I had, the flat side of them, and I started by laying the paper on top of that and putting plants on top of it. So I flipped that tile over, flat side, then I put the paper on and I started adding plant material to the top of it. And you can see I'm building layers. This is my second sheet. I started adding some more plant material to it. I just kept building up and building up. And then I came to another layer. This is some coleus plants in my house. I started laying pieces there. And I would say put as much on as you can, but try not to overlap too much. Then you can see I made a sandwich. I found another tile. I sandwiched them together. And what I ended up doing, I didn't use binder clips on this. They weren't quite big enough. So I took and tied them together with just jute string, trying to sandwich them together. Now here's another example that you can see of binding some papers like that with the cardboard and the binder clips. You can do either one, but just something to make contact with all of the foliage. Then I'm going to take and I'm going to put that on top of the steamer rack in my pot. And remember, the water was boiling, so I carefully lift the lid on, put that inside. At this point, I go ahead and turn the heat off on the stove and then put the lid back on. And I let it steam for probably an hour to an hour and a half, and I make sure that I don't lift the lid to check on it. I just leave it alone for that period of time. This bundle has steamed for the right amount of time, so it's time to lift the lid off and take it out. And I'm going to cut the strings, the jute string, and open it up. And you can see that I'm peeling off the leaves. It smells kind of funny because it's kind of like rotting plants when you open it up. But look at some of the beautiful colors that are coming off there. Some of those bright purple ones ended up not being bright purple or maroon colored in the print that it made. So as we go through these, I'm just lifting up, but I want you to see, look on this one leaf and just the detail. That's such a beautiful detail and such a beautiful golden color. So I keep taking plant material off, and this is interesting. Some of the flowers did leave a golden yellow, and then the little leaves around them are very detailed. Here's some more detail pieces. So I'm looking and thinking that all in all, I'm pretty satisfied with this. I got quite a few good prints. Now I'm going to look and see what can I do with these. So this is something that I made another time when I had done some eco printing or eco printing with leaves and foliage. I went ahead and made it into a book. I took the content, I mean, when I think about a book, the content is what you're trying to group together and contain. And so my content was all of those prints that I had made, and I contained them and stitched them into a book. And I didn't do writing or anything. I could come back in and do that. But this is kind of a neat way of me displaying them, what I did. And then I took some gosh, this was like some kind of natural papers that I did have some of this on hand that I got in an art store, and I covered it, and then I laced it and put beads on the back. So just something simple, a book you can make, or tags. There's lots of different things you can do with the papers after you have made them. So aside from the book I made with the eco prints, and I showed that to you, I also was looking at some of the prints that I got, and this time I thought my paper was a little wet and maybe they were a little faded. So I took them and I made some cards out of them, and I went ahead and printed with my jelly plate some stamps on them, tore them to fit a card format. And so these were kind of neat. You know, I think this is something that you can also do with these, to attach them to the front of a card. You could write something on them. And then I've got the envelopes that they will fit in. Here's something else you can do with your prints. Go ahead and crop off a piece that you like and put it in a mat and a small frame, and you've got a ready-to-go piece of artwork that you've made. Fabric patterns with a do-it-yourself bleach pen. What I want to show you next is how to bleach fabric. And what I have done, I find whatever's around the house. Now, I used to have a bleach pen, and I went to buy one, I can't find them anymore. So I don't know what the deal is, but with that bleach pen, I could come in and squeeze out patterns onto my black fabric. This is just black cotton fabric, a scrap that I had. And I can squeeze patterns on it and let it sit for a little while, then rinse it out. And with this process, you don't want it to keep bleaching. You're eating away at the fabric, so you're going to want to stop that with a salt bath in a bowl. And I will do some still shots and show you specific recipes that might help with this instead of me just talking about it. But what I'm going to do is mix up. I don't have a bleach pen. I do have, ta-da! Look at that. That's old. And I know that if I mix that up, that will bleach. I could paint things on with this. I've tried this before and it works. But instead of that, what I'm going to use is liquid bleach and some cornstarch. And I'm going to put it in a squeeze bottle. I would put it in this one, only I still have glue in it. So if you have an empty glue squeeze bottle, use that. If not, I found this one, so I may try that. And I'll pour it in there. That's got a little tip to it, so I'll be able to make my designs on here. The same thing with doing with this. Make sure you're wearing gloves, make sure you have an apron on. And I'm gonna say, put something on your surface. I found this glass from an old picture frame. So I just pulled that out and thought, well, that gives me a nice sturdy surface that I can draw these designs and just leave the fabric on there and pull it off of it, and it won't soak into anything. Because bleach, obviously, you don't want to get it on furniture and on things and have it soak into things. So what I'm going to try, I found some scraps. I think that's silk. It may not be. It may be polyester. But here's some beautiful colors that look silky. And originally what I did was the black. we'll do some more on that. But I was just looking at this and I thought, what would happen if I tried the bleach pen on these colors? Would it come out with that same brown color, or would what's going to happen? So I'm experimenting. I'm just kind of having fun along with you guys here. I'm going to try some of these fabrics that are cotton. So I know in some way that will work. So I'm just going to say, look for scraps you might have around the house. There are so many things you can do with scraps of fabric. And if you're not a sewer and you don't have scraps of fabric, you might even have a bag of clothing, old clothing. Maybe there's something torn. You're getting ready to throw it out. There's an old shirt. Maybe you're giving it Goodwill. Can you repurpose it? That's just the question I have. Can you repurpose it, and what can you do with it? So I'm going to get this set up, and I'm going to show you the recipe and how I mix up the bleach pen, and I will get back with you. So here's what you're going to need for the do-it-yourself bleach pen. You'll need cornstarch, bleach, water, and a tablespoon, measuring tablespoon. So take 4 tablespoons of the cornstarch, mix it, put it in a bowl, and mix about a half cup water, and I usually use warm water. Make sure it's all dissolved. Then add 6 tablespoons of bleach to that and stir it really well. And you can see here it's kind of a thick soup-like consistency. Okay, I have made the bleach solution. I put it in this little small container. I'm not sure if that's going to be too thin to spread. I'm not sure. We're going to try it like this. But I put out my different fabrics, and underneath it I've got the glass picture frame. So I'm going to go through and just see what happens here. That's not too bad. That's kind of I can get some direction. It's not splattering out too much. Let's see what happens with, let's just put some dots on here. Let's make a splatter thing on that one. On this, let's do some leaves. This is kind of fun just to see what will happen. On this one, I think I'm going to do stripes. Oh, I may do crisscross. And once again, you notice I'm wearing gloves. This kind of smells real bleachy. Ugh. When I was in the kitchen mixing this, I was just real careful to kind of protect my surface. Okay, so I'm going to say this might be good to go. I'm going to stop right there. Well, no, I'm not. I can't stop. There we go. This fabric might be polyester. I'm not sure what it was, and it may not bleach at all. So I'm going to leave these on here for a few minutes and come back and wipe some off, see what's happening, and then I'll rinse them. And we'll see what we come up with. Okay, I only had to leave these on for just a couple minutes, and I could tell that the black fabric was already just bleaching out. That was a nice cotton, dark color black, and it bleaches out to this beautiful sable brown. So that's the best one right there. The others, I found that these must not be silk. This must be polyester, some kind of synthetic fabric, and it just didn't take the bleach at all. So I'm going to let these dry and end up just with the plain fabric again. But it's a fun experiment to try and to see what happens. This started taking a little bit, but not much. So I think I would suggest, if you're doing this, stick with a nice dark colored cotton and not synthetic. So this is the book I made. I think I showed you a picture of it earlier. And that was all the rusted, not the rusted, but the bleached fabric. And what I did was make a front and back cover with that fabric. And I think it's kind of neat. And then I have my book inside. It's a concertina fold book. But what you've done with the fabric, it can be used in so many different ways. So this is just one way that I chose to use that fabric. Rusting paper and fabric. So what I'm going to do next is set up some rusting fabrics and papers. And I found the lid. It's got a couple inches depth to it. So I found the lid to a box, and I think I'll use that for this piece of watercolor paper. And you really want your paper to be sturdy. You want it to be something that will not tear up in the water, because you're going to be leaving it spritzed and wet, and so you want it to be nice and sturdy. You could do a cardstock around the house if you had something thicker like that. You're also going to need some vinegar, and I just use the white vinegar. And what I did was get a spritzer, and I just put about half water and half vinegar in here, and that's what I'm going to spritz the paper. That's going to be my mordant, and it's acid based, so it's going to bite into the pieces of iron, the tools that I have, the wires and washers, everything that I have that I want to rust onto the paper. So I'm going to go ahead and you can see I've chosen some tools. I even found some wire. If you had wire that you could bend and put on there, that's something. I've also used steel wool, and it will rust and have a real delicate pattern on your paper. What we're going to do besides this with the paper is also I'm going to try a piece of fabric, and I may just lay the fabric on top of that and see if it will pick up the rusted items on the fabric as well as on the paper below. So first thing I'm going to do is spritz this with this vinegar water. And we're going to stop this, like I was talking before. You need something alkaline, like this is acid, and you need something alkaline. So I'm gonna use probably salt. Do that salt bath again. And I'm gonna just lay these pieces on here. Yeah. I'm not sure that there's any composition, because I know that I'll use this paper, I'll cut it up and I'll use it for other things, so there may not be any composition going on here, just laying things down. I don't know, I might try the wire right there. I might try this, that. Okay, let's see what else I've got. Oh, here's a square one. Put that there. That might be it for now. Then I'm gonna spritz that really well. Get it damp. I'm gonna kind of get this paper, not the paper, but the fabric. I'm gonna do a little, I should have probably wet that first, but I'm gonna do some spritzing and get that damp. So I'm gonna get my fabric damp. sometimes fabric and paper will also have sizing in it, and that sizing will keep it from accepting things. So let's just try. I've got that kind of damp. I'm going to lay it over here. I'm going to dampen it again. Make sure all of this is touching. So your main idea is make sure that all the pieces that are rusted are touching what you want to transfer, that you want to transfer the rust to. I have not tried it with tea, but I think I'm going to do that, where the tea tannins release black oxide from the iron, and it comes out different colors, where this will release the red oxide. I think I'm going to go get some tea, and I'll be right back. Okay, here's what I did at the very end. I laid more things on here. I did some stuff to weight down the fabric because I want it to make contact with the paper and the fabric. And then I took some cling wrap or saran wrap, and I covered it. Now, the thing is, I'm not going to just totally seal off the oxygen. I want there to be oxygen in there, but I want it slightly covered so that when I set this aside for a few hours or overnight, it's not going to totally dry out. You can still get some prints off of it, but sometimes it tears the paper if it's totally dried out. So I'm just spritzing it one last time and just putting a little bit of a canopy over it. I'm going to set this aside, and then we can come back and I'll show you what we come up with. Next, I'm going to try using some strong tea that I made, and I'm going to put rusted objects on top of the paper. I've already kind of pre-moistened the paper with just water. And then I'm going to use this to see if it will bring out the rust. And like I said, I've heard that it brings out black oxide instead of red oxide. So the rust may look different. I had no idea what tea to use, so I just grabbed something I had. It's a roasted herbal tea, so we'll see what happens here. First thing I'm going to do is start laying some rusted items on here. And this is the part that I love with just being creative and experimenting. Let's put that right there. Let's put, oh, here's something. I can put that there. I can put this here. Okay, we'll let it go at that. I've got a pipette. You could have an eyedropper or anything, but I'm going to suck up some of this and just kind of wet around that surface with the tea. And this may be a total bust. I do not know. I usually do this only with the vinegar. But I have heard that you can do it without that heavy acid. Okay, almost done. And with this one, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to leave it for a while, so I'm going to put a little bit, a little bit of the cling wrap over it to see if it, just to keep it from totally drying out. Okay, I think I've got most of that area covered. Okay, let's see what happens. I'm going to cover it with some cling wrap, set it aside for a while, and we'll see what happens. Well, I've let this rusting go on for a few hours. I went to had dinner and that sort of thing, and I'm a little too impatient to let it wait overnight. So, you know, it's trial and error, and you kind of have to figure out if you've gotten it too wet or not wet enough. Now I'm noticing, I'm just going to pull some of this off of here. Looks like the fabric is a little too wet, or it needed to stay longer. Here is a tip also. I didn't do this, but if you've got wire and you're wanting to, let's say you have wire fencing that's rusted, what works neat, it's really neat, if you take a long piece of fabric, you lay that down and you roll it up and get it kind of in a bundle. I didn't do that on this, and it was hard to get it to adhere. So you may have better luck with the paper underneath. Oh, it's done a little bit here, but not as much as I would like. Well, see, it shows on the other side. There's some of it. I'm going to lay it over here. Let's see what happened with the paper. Well, it looks like, okay, see, I like the wire. I almost think I want to try the idea of wrapping it, bundling it, because I didn't have enough in contact. But wherever something was flat and had good contact, there were some really nice imprints here. This is pretty wet. I probably should have had it more just damp instead of just wet. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take and make a salt bath. I just end up with just the regular cheap salt, table salt. You can do rock salt, whatever. I make a bowl with some hot water, some warm water, whatever, and something to where the salt will dissolve, I guess is what I'm saying. And then I soak this. I soak the paper, I soak the fabric, maybe an hour. I don't think you need much more than that, but that will help stop the oxidation process, this rusting process. So I'm going to do that, and then I will come back a little later and check the tea tray that had the version of rusting with tea, and we'll see how that worked out. I'm going to try something a little different. You know, I mentioned if you have wire or screen, you can roll it into bundles. Well, I took some of the wire I have, and I just laid it on a dampened piece of fabric, and this is kind of a, not bright white, it's kind of a taupey color. Spritzed it with the sprayer that has vinegar and water in it, and then I'm putting another piece of fabric on it, and what I'm going to do is see what will happen if I roll and bundle all this wire together and make a bundled mess, and see, it's almost like a metal tie-dye. We're going to see what will happen. Some of it may just not stay in there very well, but we will see. See if I can keep some of it in here. Careful if you do this, don't poke yourself. Okay. Ow, I just did. So I'm going to bundle this all up, and I'm going to wrap just a little bit of the saran wrap on it, and I'm going to let this go ahead and just stay overnight, and then next time when I come back and show you this, it will have been like the next day that I'll unwrap it, and we'll see if any of it came off on the material. I want to show you some of the final results on the rusting experiments that I was doing. This was on the paper using the vinegar and water, and you can see how if something doesn't touch the paper or touch the surface, it doesn't leave a mark. But this had some, I love the outline of this crescent wrench, and some of these outlines of the tool. So that's kind of neat on paper. Then I pulled out the one that was done with tea, and depending on what kind of tea you use, it's going to make a difference. But I still got rusted pieces, but where it bled from the rusted items, you can tell that it has a grayer, a different color, kind of a bluey gray color instead of the orangey color of the iron. So that's an experiment. I may try that again with some different types of tea, maybe an Earl Grey tea, and just see what colors I can get. Then there was one where I took the wire and it was all crumply, and I just rolled it together and just wadded it all together, and I left it overnight. And that's kind of interesting. I did it on a tan paper, so it's not real pronounced. You can see it's kind of a taupey tan fabric, not paper, but fabric. But it's kind of interesting, just the marks that it leaves on there. And so that's with fabric. Then this is also the one with fabric, and it was what I laid on top of the paper when I was doing that. So these are just some things you can come up with, and the way I use them was with books. I think I mentioned earlier I like to sometimes create books. This is one that I use the papers for the cover. It was nice and heavy, made pockets. I stitched it together. And this is a book where I just took all kinds of scrap papers that I had and made a perfect binding with glue, and then used this as my cover. It's a nice art paper that's a thick cotton rag paper. I think it was BFK 140-pound printmaking paper. And then for the spine, I took the actual fabric and I stitched it on here to bind that. So all of it is the rusted look. And then I took a piece of leather and used that for my closure. Same thing with this one. This was where I took did the exact same thing, and I stitched differently on the spine, but I used papers I had. I've used this for note-taking, and different shaped papers. It's kind of a fun book, but the whole thing is held together with this rusted paper. So I hope you have fun doing this. Here was something else I did with the rusted paper. I made some gift boxes, and then I cut the exact interior size and lined the bottom and top with the rusted paper to match some of the colors on the outside. So let's take a look at egg tempera and how it was used, why it was used, when it was used. We'll look at a few pieces here. Basically, back in the Renaissance, this was very popular. The basic premise is that the egg yolk acts as a binder. So when you have powdered pigments, either from finely crushed rocks or minerals or vegetation, you need something to hold that together so that when it dries on your surface, it's not going to flake off or peel off. And so the egg yolk itself was a great binder for that. And this was, it kind of went out of favor after the 1500s when oil paints were more prominent. Now, one of the attributes, well, it could be an attribute or something that isn't so good, but they dry it. Egg tempera paint dries very quickly, so you have to paint quickly. And most artists will keep adding a little egg yolk to their paint as they're painting, and they might paint in strokes, smaller areas at a time. But one good thing is it acts as a glaze, so it dries so quickly you can keep glazing colors over it. I've got some pieces here. Well, we just looked at some things with Botticelli, two of his pieces. In like the 20th century, some current artists started using it again. Andrew Wyeth, Jacob Lawrence. So those are just some samples to show you, but we're going to look at how to actually make our own egg tempera paint and see what it does. This is how you're going to start making the egg tempera. First of all, you need an egg and 2 bowls, And you're going to take and crack the egg, and you're going to separate it, the whites in one bowl, and then hold the yolk in your hand. Roll the yolk around in your hand a bit to where it kind of dries out. And then what I do is kind of pinch the yolk over that second bowl and make a little slit or poke it or something so that you can get the yolk out without the membrane. That's what you're going to use in your second bowl, and discard the whites. Well, I have my egg yolk, and it doesn't have any of the membrane in there from the white. And the masters used powdered pigment. I don't have powdered pigment, but I do have powdered ground turmeric and red pepper. So I'm wondering if those would make some interesting colors. And then I also have food coloring. I may try something like that. The recipe is that you try to mix equal amounts of your egg yolk with water. And I'm going to say I'm going to mix a teaspoon of water in there. And when I've done this in the past, I have mixed more egg yolks up at once. So I had a nicer, more to work with than just one egg yolk. There's a little speck of something in there. Let's get that out. Okay, but that's pretty well mixed up. Then what I'm going to do is, I've got a plexi palette. I'm going to put out a little bit of the turmeric, and then a little bit of the red pepper on here. Okay, and I'm going to come in, I've got myself a palette knife, but you could use anything. You can any kind of spatula like that. I'm going to add some of this to it and see if I can mix it together. It makes it it's looking kind of like a paste. Now, if any of you have done oil painting, it's like, how thick do you want this? That seems a little thick to me. I'm going to add a little more. Let's see about that. We'll check on that one here. Let me wipe off my palette knife. Then I'm going to add some of the egg yolk over here. And I would like to, at some point, be able to add some food coloring in there and see what happens. Well, the red pepper doesn't mix quite as well as the turmeric. It's pretty lumpy. The other thing that you can do is when you have your tempera, when you have your egg and you add a teaspoon of, or whatever the amount is, equal amounts of water, you could also come in and add a drop of oil to it. What you're doing is kind of making an oil paint, has a binder in it. Let's see if any of this will work. I'm eager to try a little bit. And this is all experimentation, so it all comes out different every time. What I found to paint on, I have this, I had a little board like this, and it is a clay board. This was a sample that I got from Ampersand, and you can also get it in gesso board. I thought that'd be kind of fun to paint on. You could paint on a stiff paper or canvas, whatever you might have around. But I thought I would just try this and see how this works. I'm almost thinking I got that too thick and not ground up enough. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to add, well, you can tell that's got a thin glazy surface to it. What I'm going to do is take and add a drop of oil, and I'm just going to use cooking oil, just some cooking oil that I've got, and add one little drop to it and see what happens. Okay, what I did was add just a little bit of oil to this, made it not quite as pasty, and a little more egg to it. And you can tell that, can you see just the really nice layer? So artists that do this, it's the patience of, use it as kind of a glazing oil paint that you let layers dry and you see what will happen. And this is not dry yet, but let's see what happens if I add some. And I didn't grind all this. I mean, when things are ground by hand, of course, there's a whole different take on it. It's still got grainy. Mine was the red pepper, ground red pepper, and that hasn't been ground enough. But, this at least gives you an idea. I'm going to let this dry and then put another layer. I'm going to see next, I think what I'm going to do is put a drop of food coloring in and see if I can come up with another color and what that does with the egg yolk binder. Okay, one comment I was going to make is when you use powdered pigments, if you buy some, they're kind of expensive, kind of pricey, but if you do buy some, make sure you wear a mask because it's just such a fine, fine powder that can get in the air and you don't want to inhale that. So I didn't use a mask, I'm just using spices, which you can tell it's not ground very fine. But I also found, I had a little container of, it's powdered graphite or powdered, I think this is powdered charcoal. So I thought, well, let's mix that with a little bit and see what happens. That's kind of a nice glaze. Then I took a drop of food coloring. And you can tell I just put a little bit of that in there. Let me move this up. I want you to be able to see this. So I want to see what happens with this food coloring. Okay. I'm kind of liking the food coloring because that can suffice for part of the water that you're going to add. And look how nice that comes out and it doesn't have the grains in it. Basically, I'm used to oil painting and putting impasto, thicker layers of oil paint. This is a whole different concept because it's just fine, fine layers, glazing that goes on top. And I'm trying this on a piece of paper now. I added some red food coloring to that. I like the way it flows on there. If you look at the little board I did earlier, I was just adding things. But, you can tell how clunky as this looks. There's still areas where the blue overlapped the yellow and you can see green showing through. It's kind of like a watercolor. But the difference is, I don't know if you can tell, there's a sheen, kind of an eggshell sheen. When you buy paint, it's just it's not flat, it's just kind of a slight sheen to it, which is kind of cool. Let's see, I'm going to see what this does. Oh, that's a very nice gray with the powdered, I believe it was powdered charcoal. My other was powdered graphite. I think this is powdered charcoal. So my suggestion is go ahead, if you use the egg yolk, add some liquid watercolor or a little food dye to it. And you don't have to worry about the pigment grinding up the pigment because look, this comes out very, Very nice. And once these dry, this is soaking nicely into the paper. Once that is dry, I can paint over it. And it's almost like a sealed watercolor. It's not going to reconstitute when you add water after this. It should be pretty stable. So have fun. Well, we're at the end of our video, and I hope you've enjoyed some of the processes we've worked on today. We've looked at eco prints. We've looked at bleaching, using a do-it-yourself bleach pen to bleach into fabric that we can use in different ways. And we've learned how to use acid, different types of acid, to rust materials, to rust items onto fabric and paper. And then we've looked at how to make egg tempera. All of these processes are interesting because they combine a bit of art and science together, and using mostly household items. So I hope you keep experimenting and have lots of fun.